They said no one could have survived that storm, not a man, not a beast, not even hope itself. But when an aging cowboy named Eli Turner found a 1-month-old foal half buried in the snow beside its frozen mother, something in him refused to walk away. He carried the trembling creature home through the blizzard, never guessing that night would change everything. Because the foal he saved didn't just survive. It grew beyond reason, beyond nature, into something the mountains had never seen before. And before long, the man who thought he'd lost everything would realize he'd brought home a legend. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The wind never truly stopped in Broken Mesa Valley. It crawled through the pines, hissed across the frozen fences, and moaned through the cracks of old cabins like some ghost that couldn't remember why it stayed. That winter, it carried nothing but ice and silence. The snow lay heavy on the land, swallowing sound and color, until even the mountains looked asleep. Eli Turner lived alone at the edge of the valley, in a cabin built from timber that had outlasted better men. He was past 40 tall and wiry, with a beard the color of smoke and eyes that had seen too much war and too little peace. Once he'd broken horses for the U.S. cavalry. Now he fixed fences and shoveled snow just to keep his hands from shaking. 3 winters ago, fire had taken his ranch, along with Grace, the only woman who'd ever believed he could build something that lasted. He hadn't left since. The ashes had long blown away, but he stayed as if the land itself had chained him to his grief. He lived by habit, not by hope. Every morning he chopped wood, shoveled paths, fed no one, and waited for night to fall. Some men prayed for better days. Eli just prayed for the strength to keep breathing. The only thing that spoke to him now was the wind, and it never said anything worth hearing. That night, the sky turned the color of steel. Clouds rolled down from the Bitterroot Range, thick and heavy as smoke. By dusk, snow was falling sideways. He checked the latch on the barn door, stacked firewood beside the stove, and sat by the window with a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. The wind screamed around the cabin, rattling the shutters like fists on a coffin. He stared into the fire, its glow flickering against the rifle mounted over the hearth. The storm pressed harder, creaking the old beams, and for a moment he wondered if the whole mountain was trying to bury him, along with everything he'd lost. Outside, the blizzard howled like something alive. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, faint, distant, carried on the wind. A short, thin whinny, broken, desperate. Eli frowned. He waited, breath-held, listening past the shriek of snow against the windows. Nothing. Only the wind again. He rubbed his temple and muttered, "Probably a coyote. Or my damn mind playing tricks." But then it came again, clearer this time. A cry, weak, trembling, closer. He stood up so fast the chair fell backward. The sound cut straight through the storm's roar, straight into his chest. It wasn't the call of a predator. It was pain. Eli grabbed his coat, his scarf, and the old storm lantern from the wall. The glass rattled as he lit it. When he opened the door, the wind punched through the cabin like a freight train. Snow swirled and biting at his face. He pushed into it anyway. The cold hit like knives. Snow reached his knees within a dozen steps. He hunched into the wind, holding the lantern low, its light swinging wildly. The beam caught only flashes of white and shadow-broken fence posts, drifts shaped like tombstones. The cry came again, somewhere past the corral. He forced his way through the snow, crunching under his boots, his breath burning. The light flickered over a dark mound ahead. He stumbled closer and stopped. A mare lay in the snow, her body half-buried, legs, stiff eyes, frozen open in a glassy stare. Frost crusted her lashes. She'd been dead for hours, and beside her, barely visible beneath a thin crust of ice, something moved. It was a foal. No bigger than a large dog, trembling so hard it barely made a sound. Its sides heaved. Steam curled faintly from its nostrils. Eli dropped to his knees, setting the lantern down. His fingers found the tiny chest. Still warm. Still beating. "You poor thing. How are you still breathing?" he whispered. The foal twitched weakly, a soft squeak escaping its throat. Eli glanced at the mare again, her frozen face tilted toward the storm. Something twisted inside him. He saw Grace lying in firelight, coughing smoke calling his name before the roof fell. He had carried her body out of the ashes once the same way he now wanted to carry this little creature out of the snow. He heard the old voice in his head, calm and cruel. "Walk away, Eli. You can't save everything." He pulled the foal closer instead, wrapping it in his coat. "Easy now, I got you," he murmured, tucking it tight against his chest. It shivered once, then went still. He could feel the faint flutter of its heart against his ribs. Turning toward home, he leaned into the wind. The storm tore at him, shoving, clawing, trying to wrench the life from his arms. His lantern flickered, threatening to die. He kept moving. Snow blinded him, wind screamed in his ears, and yet beneath all that noise, he spoke softly to the bundle in his arms. "Hang on, little one. Storm's bad, but it ain't taking you tonight." Each step was a battle. His boots sank deep. His breath came ragged. He slipped, once fell to one knee, the foal pressed against his chest. He pushed back up, teeth gritted. The wind roared louder, as if furious he'd defied it. By the time he reached the cabin, he couldn't feel his hands. He kicked the barn door open with his shoulder, staggered inside, and dropped to his knees on the straw. The foal slid from his arms, limp but alive. He slammed the door shut, blocking out the gale, and grabbed an armful of hay from the corner, spreading it beneath the tiny body. Then he went for the stove, striking matches, until the lantern flame caught the kindling. Smoke rose warm and sweet, and light filled the stall. The foal didn't move. Eli rummaged through a box on the shelf, found an old milk bottle, and filled it with warm water and powdered feed. He crouched beside the small creature, lifting its head gently. "Come on now. Drink, boy. You want to see morning, don't you?" At first it refused. The tiny jaws stayed clamped shut. Eli kept his palm against its neck, rubbing in slow circles, whispering nonsense like a prayer. "Easy. Come on, that's it." After a few moments, the throat moved once, twice, and the first sip went down. He smiled just barely, but it was the first real smile in years. "There you go," he said hoarsely. "Told you we ain't quitting yet." He fed it little by little until the bottle was half empty. Then he spread a wool blanket over it, tucking the edges tight. The foal's breathing steadied. Its head rested against the straw eyes, still closed lashes damp with frost. Eli leaned back against the wall, exhausted. His clothes were soaked, his beard crusted with ice. The fire's glow flickered across the stall, painting everything gold and red. He could feel heat on his face again, life sneaking back into his fingers. For a while, there was only the crackle of flames and the rhythm of two heartbeats, one is one not. Then the foal stirred. A soft whimper escaped it. Slowly, it blinked. And when its eyes opened fully, he froze. They were silver, not gray, not blue silver like light on a blade. The reflection of the lantern danced in them, tiny sparks moving across the surface like stars in deep water. Eli swallowed hard. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. The foal blinked again, calm now, steady. It looked straight at him, not past him, not through him, but at him. For a long moment, man and creature just stared at each other, firelight breathing between them. "Easy now, little one," he murmured, repeating the words that had carried him through the storm. "Storm's bad, but it ain't taking you tonight." He reached out, brushed a hand down its damp neck. The warmth under his palm was steady alive. The foal's tiny muzzle nudged his wrist, almost curious. Eli chuckled under his breath. "Guess we're both too stubborn to quit." The words hung in the air, half a joke, half a confession. He wasn't sure who he'd said them to grace, the horse or himself. Maybe it didn't matter. Outside, the wind still raged, slamming against the barn walls. But inside, the fire burned steady, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel like loneliness. It sounded like a heartbeat, the mountains, the storms, maybe his own. He stayed there through the night, dozing now and then, waking each time the foal moved. Every time its chest rose, he felt something rise with it inside him, a faint, impossible hope. The first sunrise after the storm hit the valley like a whisper. Light spilled across the snowdrifts, turning the whole of Broken Mesa into a sea of glass. The air was still sharp and pure, so silent that Eli could hear the faint creak of the rafters above him, the slow exhale of his own breath. He woke slumped against a wall of hay, his shoulders blanketed with frost. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then he felt its soft movement beside him. The foal was still there, curled against his leg, chest rising and falling in an easy rhythm. Alive. Eli brushed the frost from his sleeve and leaned closer. Warm. The pulse under his fingers beat steady and strong. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. He stood slowly, joints stiff from the cold, and unlatched the barn door. Morning light flooded in bright golden, almost holy. The foal blinked at it, then twitched. Its thin legs trembled, folded, and almost miraculously, it stood. Wobbly, uncertain, but standing. Eli laughed under his breath, a sound that startled even him. "You made it, huh, strong little thing." The barn looked like chaos, straw-scattered puddles frozen where the roof had leaked, his coat tossed in a heap. But for the first time in years, the space felt alive. There was warmth here, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. He crouched again, running a hand through the foal's damp mane. The little creature leaned into the touch eyes, half closed. "You came from the storm," he whispered. "Guess that makes you stormborn." The foal gave a tiny, uncertain whinny, as if in agreement. Eli chuckled. "Stormborn it is. The storm didn't take you, it delivered you." He crossed the barn to an old wooden chest, dug out a notebook, whose leather cover was worn to velvet. His handwriting, rough and faded, filled the first few pages with dates from years long gone, military notes from his time as a horse wrangler for the army. He turned to a blank page and wrote 0113. Found foal after the storm. Name Stormborn. Coat silver black, eyes pale gray, still breathing. He stared at the words for a long moment. His hand didn't shake this time. Habit returned, discipline, order, the quiet comfort of duty. By midday, the sky had cleared completely, a perfect blue arch stretching over the white world. Eli bundled the foal in an old wool blanket, tied it snug, and loaded it onto a small sled he'd built from scrap planks and rope. The path to Red Hollow was 15 miles of frozen ridges and pine-shadowed valleys, but there was no other way. The foal needed a real vet. "Don't quit on me now," he muttered, adjusting the straps. Stormborn blinked at him, eyes steady, trusting. "That's good," Eli said softly. "We'll get you fixed up proper." The road wound through snowfields and frozen creeks, the sled scraping behind him. Ravens followed overhead, their shadows gliding over the drifts. By the time the first buildings of Red Hollow came into view, the sun was already dipping toward the peaks. The town was small, half a dozen stores, a gas pump, and a veterinary clinic tucked beside an old cafe, whose sign squeaked in the wind. The painted letters on the clinic door read DR. Clara Hensley. Livestock and equine care. Eli pulled the sled to the porch and lifted the foal in his arms. The doorbell jingled as he stepped inside. The smell of iodine and hay filled the air. Behind the counter, a woman looked up from her paperwork. She was in her 50s, hair-streaked silver hands, strong and steady. Her voice when she spoke carried the gravel of a lifetime spent shouting over the wind. "Lord above," she said, setting her pen down. "What did you drag in, Turner?" Eli gave a half-smile. "Found him half dead in the snow. Need to make sure he'll live." Dr. Clara Hensley came around the table, crouched beside the foal as Eli laid it on a blanket. Her hands were quick but gentle, her eyes narrowing. As she pressed along its ribs, checked its gums, lifted a hoof. The longer she worked, the more her expression changed from concern to curiosity. "About a month old," she said finally. "Gait's a bit stiff, shoulders long for a foal his age." "Huh. Look at these withers, built like a draft, but smaller frame. Maybe a mix or something else." "Whatever he is," Eli said quietly, "he's mine now." Clara looked up at him, one brow raised. Then she laughed. "Then you just adopted yourself a full-time job, Cowboy." He grunted. "Wouldn't be the first time." She scribbled notes on a pad, muttering under her breath. "Feeding every 4 hours around the clock. Warmth 24/7. You'll need milk, replacer antibiotics, maybe probiotics if he gets colic. And patience, lots of that. I've done night watches before, Doc," Eli replied. "Won't be my first." Clara smirked. Night watches for soldiers don't kick and neigh when they're hungry. For the first time in years, Eli laughed, really laughed. The sound filled the small clinic, bouncing off the tiled walls like sunlight through clouds. Clara looked at him a moment longer, then nodded. "He's got fight in him," she said softly. "Maybe he's what you needed." Eli didn't answer, but when he turned to leave, something had shifted in his eyes. They were lighter. Not healed, but alive. The road home glowed with the colors of fire and ice. The setting sun turned the snowfields rose gold. The pines cast long blue shadows that followed him down the trail. Stormborn lay still on the sled nose, buried in the blanket, breathing slow and easy. By the time they reached the cabin, twilight had deepened into violet. Eli led the foal inside the barn, where he'd already cleaned the floor and laid a new bed of straw. He hung a small heater on the wall, fixed the latch, and pinned a makeshift schedule beside it. Feed 6 a.m., 10 a.m., 2 p.m., 6 p.m., 10 p.m., 2 a.m. He found an old kitchen clock, nailed it above the stall. Then he sat at his workbench, the light of an oil lamp spilling over his hands, and began mixing formula with the precision of a man cleaning a rifle. Every motion was careful, deliberate. He checked the temperature with his wrist, filled the bottle, and marked the measurement in his notebook. Feeding 100 mmol. Response alert. Tail movement strong. Outside, the remnants of the storm moved across the mountains, distant thunder rolling like memory. Inside, time slowed into rhythm feed, clean, rest, repeat. The barn became a pulse, steady as a heart. Each night, Eli woke to the alarm, fed Stormborn, and sat beside him until the little one settled again. The blizzard's voice was only a murmur, now a ghost, fading beyond the ridge. Sometimes, when the quiet grew too deep, Eli spoke aloud, not to the wind anymore, but to the creature that had replaced it. Stormborn, he'd whisper, "You keep breathing. I'll keep feeding." Deal, a soft wicker, would answer, and somehow that was enough. The sound reached places in him nothing else could. He found himself laughing at small things, the foal's awkward kicks, the way it tried to bite the bottle cap, the sneeze that startled them both. The barn, once a grave of silence, now echoed with life. On the 7th night, the storm finally died for good. The sky cleared black and infinite stars hanging low over the white ridges. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady, painting the walls in amber light. Eli sat in his old wooden chair, the empty bottle cooling on the table beside him. His journal lay open, words running across the page in his steady hand. Stormborn slept in the barn, visible through the window. The little chest rose and fell beneath the blanket hooves, twitching now and then, as if dreaming of running. Eli watched for a long time the reflection of the flames in his eyes. Then he said softly to no one in particular, "Ain't much, but it's life. And it's enough." He leaned back the chair, creaking, warmth seeping through his bones. For the first time in years, his body began to surrender to sleep and didn't fight it. No screaming, no smoke, no fire behind his eyelids. Just quiet. When dreams finally came, they weren't of loss. He saw the same firelight, but gentler this time. The glow of a small, stable, two shadows breathing in sync, man and beast, each keeping the other alive. Outside, snowflakes drifted from a sky at peace. Inside, the last ember flickered soft and red. The storm was gone, but its gift remained a heartbeat, a purpose, a spark. And as Eli Turner slept in that chair, his head tilted toward the barn, a faint smile touched his lips, the first since grace. By the 3rd week, the valley had begun to glitter again. The snow across Broken Mesa had thinned to a silvery crust, sparkling under the pale winter sun, like salt scattered across the earth. Every morning, Eli woke to the same sound, the deep, steady nicker echoing from the stable. It had become as much a part of his dawn as the smell of coffee or the crack of frost beneath his boots. Stormborn had changed beyond recognition. The frail, trembling foal he'd carried through the blizzard now stood chest high to him, legs long and straight muscles coiling under a coat that shimmered between gray and silver black. When the light hit just right, his hide looked metallic, like hammered steel come alive. Eli kept his logbook up to date, his handwriting as precise as ever. Week 3. Weight gain off charts. Appetite double. Eyes alert. Gait stable. He looked at the page, then at the colt chewing hay, as if trying to eat his way through Montana itself. "You're eating me out of house and home, boy," he muttered with a smile. Every inch the colt grew seemed to pull Eli a little further out of his own darkness. He'd stopped counting the days. The nights came easier now. The silence no longer bid it breathed. When he stepped outside his shadow and the horses stretched side by side across the snow, 2 survivors learning together how to walk again. One crisp afternoon, a truck rattled up the frozen dirt road. Hank Dawson, Eli's neighbor from 5 miles down the valley, climbed out with the slow, deliberate movements of an old cowboy who'd broken more bones than promises. He'd come to check fences and maybe make sure Eli was still alive. When he spotted the massive colt stepping from the stable, he stopped cold. His eyes went wide. Then he let out a low whistle. "That ain't a colt, Eli. That's a thundercloud with legs." Eli laughed. "Guess the storm left me a gift." Hank circled Stormborn, slowly running a weathered hand over the horse's shoulder. The muscle under the skin felt like tempered steel. "Lord Almighty," he said. "He's what, a month old?" "About that," Eli replied. "He's built like a 2-year-old Clydesdale." Eli shrugged, but pride tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Guess he don't know that." Hank chuckled, then grew thoughtful. "Keep an eye on him, friend. Big ones grow too fast sometimes. Bones can't always keep up with heart." "I'll watch him," Eli said. But as Hank walked back toward his truck, Stormborn lifted his head, following the man's movement with eerie focus. The colt didn't flinch or shy, he studied, almost like he was measuring the distance between himself and the rest of the world. Eli reached up, brushing a hand along the strong neck. "Easy, Stormborn," he murmured. "Not everyone's here to fight you." The colt huffed softly, and the air between them settled again, still alive, unspoken. The first week of February brought sunlight sharp enough to blind. The snow across the plains turned powdery underfoot, and Eli decided it was time to see what Stormborn could really do. He led him beyond the fences, into the wide open field that stretched toward the horizon. The air was bright and brittle. Every sound carried for miles, the crunch of boots, the jingle of reins, the quiet breath of a horse that seemed too big for its age. "Go on, boy," Eli said softly, loosening the lead rope. "Show me what you got." For a heartbeat, the colt stood still, nostrils flaring. Then, like lightning breaking from a cloud, he moved. Stormborn leapt forward with explosive grace, snow bursting behind him, muscles rippling under his silver hide. The air itself seemed to shiver as he tore across the plain. His mane fanned out like black silk, the sunlight striking it until it looked like streaks of molten metal. He didn't gallop, he surged the ground, bending to him as though it had been waiting for his return. Eli watched, mouth half-open, breath caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. He'd seen trained cavalry chargers, thoroughbreds at full sprint, but nothing like this. There was something elemental about the movement, a rhythm that belonged to the storm itself. When Stormborn finally circled back, his breath came out in thick clouds, steam rising from his back like smoke from a forge. He pranced to a stop, eyes burning with something fierce and knowing. Eli stepped forward, hand on his chest, voice low. "You're the storm itself, aren't you?" The horse gave a single sharp snort as if to agree. That moment branded itself into Eli's memory, the living embodiment of a force both wild and loyal, born from chaos but carrying peace. From that day on, the fields of Broken Mesa became their church. Each morning, Eli ran beside him, laughing as snow sprayed against his boots. The sound of hoofbeats replaced the echoes of gunfire in his head. For the first time in years, his world was full of life, not ghosts. It was Dr. Clara Hensley's truck that broke the quiet one afternoon, tires crunching up the icy path. She stepped out, wrapped in her heavy coat, squinting against the glare. When her eyes found Stormborn, she stopped mid-step. "Dear God," she breathed. "He's doubled in size." Eli handed her a steaming mug of coffee as she approached the stable. "He's been busy," he said dryly. Clara circled the horse, pulling out her measuring tape and stethoscope. She pressed a palm to his shoulder, then his ribs, then his throat. Every number she jotted down made her frown deepen. Finally, she muttered, "He's growing like nature forgot the rule book." Eli grinned. "He's eating like he wrote his own." She barked a laugh, but didn't hide the edge of concern in her eyes. Draft stock bloodline, maybe. But no colt should build this kind of muscle so fast. "You saying he's a freak? I'm saying he's extraordinary," she corrected. "And extraordinary things make me nervous." Stormborn stood perfectly still the whole time, watching her with eerie calm. His gaze didn't wander. He followed her hands, her tone, her breath, every move. Clara hesitated, lowering her stethoscope. "He watches," she said softly, "like he understands every word." Eli's reply was quiet. "Sometimes I think he does." When she finished her exam, Clara closed her notebook with a sigh. "Keep doing what you're doing. He trusts you completely. That's rare even in horses born tame." She packed her kit, glancing one last time at the towering colt. "If this is what healing looks like for you, Eli, don't question it. Just take care of each other." Eli knotted his throat too tight to speak. As her truck rumbled away, Stormborn stepped to the edge of the porch and watched it vanish down the road, his silver mane rippling in the wind. He wasn't just aware he was choosing who to trust. Eli could feel it in his bones. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of work and quiet revelation. Eli began to notice patterns he couldn't explain. Stormborn didn't just respond to commands. He responded to feelings. When Eli said, "Stay," the horse stayed even when Eli left the yard. When Eli was angry, Stormborn stepped back, calm and patient, waiting him out. When sadness crept in like cold through the cracks, Stormborn moved close, lowering his great head, until his breath touched Eli's neck. One morning, Eli slipped on the ice near the trough and went down hard. Before he could even curse, the horse was there, shoulder pressed against his arm, lifting him back to his feet. Eli laughed, rubbing his knee. "You're smarter than most men I've served with," he said. At night, Eli sat by the fire, reading through old military notes, lines of orders and casualty reports that once ruled his life. Outside, Stormborn would lie in the snow just beyond the porch light, his head resting near the cabin wall. Sometimes he'd give a low rumble, soft and rhythmic, until Eli came out. Eli would sit beside him, back against the horse's shoulder, staring at the moon climbing above the plains. "Back then," he said, once, voice barely a whisper, "I could train a dozen war horses. But none ever looked at me like you do." Stormborn breathed out a long plume of steam that curled around Eli like a living cloud. The air was cold, but Eli didn't feel it. That warmth, the shared silence, was enough. He no longer woke gasping in the dark. When the panic tried to claw its way back, all he needed was the sound of steady breathing from outside the door. The nightmares still came sometimes, but now, when they did, there was a presence waiting to pull him back. By the end of February, the snow had nearly gone. The plains were golden with thawed grass, and the air smelled faintly of rain. One evening, as the sun sank behind the Bitterroot Range, painting the world in honey and amber, Eli sat on the porch steps, watching the light change. Behind him, Stormborn stood still, as a statue mane stirring in the wind. Their shadows stretched long across the earth, the man's narrow, the horse's immense, meeting at the same point. Eli looked toward the far ridge where the black skeleton of his old barn still stood. "You know, boy," he said softly, "haven't slept this peaceful in years." Stormborn stepped forward until his head was level with Eli's shoulder. Together they watched the horizon burn down to embers. Eli smiled, small but sure. "Guess you're my kind of therapy." The horse huffed a sound, deep and almost amused, and as dusk fell across Broken Mesa, the two of them stood side by side, man and creature, both born from storms, both learning that peace, like trust, had to be earned. The wind carried their silhouettes across the plains until they disappeared into gold. March came to Broken Mesa like the breath after a storm, still cold, but no longer cruel. The snow melted in thin ribbons down the red slopes of Montana, revealing earth, the color of rusted blood. Pools of thawed ice reflected a sky pale as polished steel. The world smelled of wet pine and something new trying to be born. Eli stood at the fence line, collar turned up against the wind, watching the animal that had once fit in his arms. Stormborn moved slow and deliberate across the paddock, his hooves sinking deep into the soft mud. 3 months old and already immense, nearly 6 feet at the shoulder, over 1,000 pounds by Eli's estimate. His neck was thick and arched like a war stallion's, his chest broad, his mane heavy enough to ripple like black fire in the breeze. His coat had darkened, no longer soft silver, but the deep metallic sheen of wet steel under sunlight. Eli rubbed the back of his neck, half in awe, half in worry. "You're growing too fast for this world, boy," he said quietly. He took out his notebook and wrote in neat, measured lines. 0307. Height 17 hands. Weight est. 1000 lbs. Strength unmatched. No signs of aggression. He paused, pen hovering. The page looked too small for what stood outside his window. Something magnificent and a little terrifying was growing in that stable. Beauty that bordered on impossible. That night, the moon rose full and white, pouring silver light across the plains. Eli sat on the porch with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. The air was crisp enough to sting. All around him, the valley shimmered beneath the frost, still and endless. Somewhere beyond the fence, Stormborn stood motionless, staring at the sky. The horse's breath came in long, slow clouds. Then, without warning, he lifted his head higher and released a sound that didn't belong to any ordinary animal. It began as a low rumble, then deepened, rolling out of his chest like thunder, uncoiling through the earth. The sound carried across the entire valley, shaking the air itself. It wasn't a whinny, not really. It was something older. Wilder. Eli set his mug down, heart hammering. "Easy, boy," he called. "What's gotten into you?" The answering silence was heavy and strange. Then from distant ranches came the echo, dozens of horses whinnying in panic. Dogs barked. Somewhere wood cracked, as if a fence had given way. Stormborn turned his head slowly, eyes catching the moonlight. For a moment, Eli forgot how to breathe. The eyes glowed, not reflected, not tricked by light, but glowed like molten silver. A brightness that looked alive, intelligent, and utterly unnatural. Eli took a single step forward. Every instinct he had screamed at him to stop. And yet, as if sensing the tremor in his voice, Stormborn began to walk toward him. Each step sent soft plumes of frost rising around his hooves. When he reached the porch, he lowered his massive head and pressed it gently against Eli's shoulder. Eli exhaled slowly, one hand finding the thick mane. "You scared the whole damn valley, you know that," he whispered. The horse huffed softly, a sound almost apologetic. But even as Eli scratched behind his ear, that strange light still shimmered faintly in Stormborn's eyes, the reminder that this creature belonged to something greater, something the world wasn't built to understand. 3 days later, when Eli drove into Red Hollow to buy hay and grain, he felt it immediately, the shift. Eyes followed him wherever he went. At the feed store, 2 men leaned against the bar counter, their voices pitched just low enough to carry. "Heard that horse of his scream so loud it cracked a fence," one said. "Devil horse, they're calling it," the other added, shaking his head. Across the street, the woman who ran the general store lowered her voice when he stepped inside. "Animals sense things, Mr. Turner," she murmured as she counted his change. "Some souls ain't meant to be tamed." Eli offered a thin smile, said nothing. But as he walked down the wooden sidewalk toward his truck, the conversations around him faded to silence. He could feel their stares on his back, half fear, half curiosity. When he reached the edge of town, he muttered under his breath, "They'll never understand you." His hand brushed the rough leather of his gloves, but the words weren't meant for him. They were for the being waiting beyond the ridge. 2 exiles misunderstood in different languages, both marked by survival. Late that afternoon, a dust cloud appeared on the road. Eli wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from the barn just as a sheriff's pickup rolled to a stop in front of the gate. Sheriff Cole Merrick climbed out, tall, broad-shouldered, mid-50s, with the kind of weathered face carved by wind and duty. He had the look of a man who'd seen too much of both law and loss. He took off his sunglasses, squinting toward the paddock where Stormborn grazed. "That's a big damn animal, Eli," he said. Eli leaned against the fence. "Ain't his fault he grew." Merrick walked closer, boots crunching in the gravel. Town's talking. Folks are nervous. Said they heard him howl at the moon. Eli gave a short laugh. Howl, huh? Maybe they should try living out here, see what silence really sounds like. Don't start, Merrick warned, but his voice softened. Listen, I don't want to make trouble. But if that animal hurts someone livestock, a kid wandering too close, I'll have to put it down. You know how the law works. Eli's expression hardened. He's hurt no one, Sheriff. Maybe he's the only thing out here still pure. The wind shifted, lifting the dust between them. Stormborn stood behind Eli, silent but watchful. The sheriff's eyes flicked toward him and lingered there a moment longer than necessary. I know what losing does to a man, Merrick said finally. I lost mine too. But don't let grief blind you, son. Sometimes what we love most turns wild. Eli's voice was low-measured. Maybe wild's the only honest thing left. The sheriff sighed, putting his glasses back on. You watch him, Turner. Don't make me come back for something I don't want to do. The truck pulled away, leaving a swirl of dust and silence. Eli stood there until it faded, the wind whistling through the wire fence. He turned to Stormborn and laid a hand on his neck. You hear that, boy? World's already picking sides. The horse flicked an ear, calm and unbothered, but the words hung heavy between them. After that day, Eli stopped going to town altogether. He didn't need the stares or the whispers. Hank Dawson brought hay and feed once a week. Clara called occasionally to check in, her voice full of both curiosity and concern. Beyond those two, the world might as well have ended at the fence line. The ranch fell quiet again, but it wasn't the lonely quiet of before. It was charged like the pause before lightning. Every evening as dusk fell, Stormborn would climb the small rise above the house and stand there, motionless, watching the horizon. Sometimes he'd give a low, distant whinny, answering something only he could hear. Eli took to writing at night, his journal filling with words that barely made sense, even to him. Something's changing. The air feels charged. He saw it in the way Stormborn moved grace that bordered on supernatural power, too large for a creature his age. Yet never once had the horse shown harm or malice. With Eli, he was gentle, obedient, almost reverent. When Eli placed a hand against his neck, he could feel the steady pulse beneath, strong enough to seem eternal. One night the moon rose clear and white again, spilling across the fields. Eli stood by the fence, whispering into the cold. Whatever you are, he said, don't let them scare you into being less. Stormborn turned his head, eyes flashing silver for just a heartbeat. The reflection of the moon, or something older. He took a slow step closer until Eli could feel the heat of his breath. Yeah, Eli murmured. Didn't think so. He laughed once, quiet, resigned, a little proud. The laughter drifted away into the cold, swallowed by the valley. Overhead clouds gathered beyond the mountains, their undersides glowing faintly in the moonlight. The wind shifted again, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Somewhere out there, another storm was building. Eli looked up, sensing it without fear. Two storms, one of nature, one of men, were moving toward each other. He reached out, rested his hand on Stormborn's shoulder. Whatever comes, he said softly, we'll ride it out. Like we did before. The horse lifted his head to the sky, and for a moment the world was silent. Then faint and far away came an echo, another call answering his. It was impossible to tell whether it was thunder or something alive. Eli smiled, the ghost of warmth in his voice. Yeah, he whispered. I hear it too. The wind carried their silhouettes across the plain, one man, one creature outlined in the pale shimmer of the coming storm. April arrived late to Broken Mesa. Spring came shyly here, like something uncertain. It was still welcome. The peaks remained capped in snow, but the valleys below had begun to breathe again, the ground softening, the scent of thawed earth thick in the air. Patches of green pierced through the mud, timid blades of grass against the brown world. The wind carried warmth now, though it still bit when it shifted from the north. Eli worked his way through the morning chores, hammering a loose fence board, stacking feed-cleaning tools. The air was filled with a ring of metal and the sound of hooves shifting restlessly inside the stable. Stormborn had been uneasy for days. He'd taken to standing at the edge of the paddock, staring toward the tree line with his ears pricked forward, muscles tense as bowstrings. Eli noted it in his journal, his handwriting as steady as ever, April thaw. Bears sighted North Ridge. Stormborn restless. He didn't think much of it. Not at first. But the mountains had a way of reminding a man how fragile his sense of control really was. And that reminder came one misty morning, carried on the sound of breaking wood. The dawn was gray, wrapped in fog. Eli was inside the barn, sharpening a hatchet when he heard it, a muffled clatter from the yard. He stepped outside, boots sinking into the damp soil. The meat barrel beside the shed lay overturned, its lid half buried in mud. A single massive paw print pressed into the ground beside it, deep, wide, unmistakable. His breath caught. Hell, he muttered. Grizzly. The bitterroot bears had come down early that year. Hunger drove them from the high ridges long before the snows were gone. Eli turned for the cabin, reaching for the rifle mounted above the door. But before his hand found it, a sound split the air, sharp, violent, like wood exploding under pressure. The stable door. He spun around just in time to see Stormborn burst through the half-shattered gate, eyes blazing, nostrils flaring steam. The horse galloped into the yard and stopped, dead center, hooves sinking into the wet ground. Across from him, emerging from the fog, came the bear. The animal was enormous, shoulders as high as Stormborn's chest, fur matted with ice breath, gusting invisible clouds. It moved with slow, deliberate menace, the way only apex predators do when they know no creature can challenge them. But Stormborn did. He lowered his head, ears flat, and let out a hiss of breath so sharp it cut through the fog like wind over fire. The two forces, one born of the forest, one born of the storm, faced each other across 10 yards of muddy earth. The air vibrated. Eli stood frozen, rifle hanging forgotten in his hands. His instinct screamed to fire, to end it before it began. But another instinct, older, held him still. He had seen men face death in war. He knew the difference between fear and something sacred. The bear reared slightly, rumbling deep in its chest, saliva stringing from its jaws. Stormborn answered with a sound that shook the ground, a long, resonant cry that rolled across the valley like thunder. It wasn't panic. It was power. A declaration. The bear faltered. One massive paw stepped back. Its head swung uncertain now. The sound had come not from prey, but from something equal or greater. After a tense heartbeat that seemed to last forever, the grizzly turned. It lumbered toward the tree line, stopped once to glance back, then vanished into the gray. Eli's lungs finally released the breath they'd been holding. The rifle slipped from his hands, landing soundlessly in the mud. Stormborn stood unmoving, sides, heaving steam rising from his body like smoke from a forge. The man's voice came out, rough, trembling. "You just faced down a damn bear," he whispered. His throat tightened. "What are you, boy?" Stormborn turned his head toward him, calm again, and gave a single low snort, as if to say even he didn't know. 3 days later, Hank must have talked because Clara's truck came rattling up the trail. Eli met her at the gate, arms crossed. "Heard you had company of the grizzly sort," she said, stepping out. Word travels faster than bullets around here, he muttered. Come see for yourself. She followed him to the stable, and for a long moment, the usually unshakable Dr. Clara Hensley simply stood there silent. Stormborn filled the space. He was towering now, 17 hands at the shoulder, nearly 1.73 meters, and easily 1,200 pounds. His coat had darkened again, the silver taking on a sheen so metallic it almost reflected light. His breath came slow and deep, each exhale visible in the cool air. This isn't possible, Clara murmured. 3 months old, Eli gave a faint smile. I stopped trying to call him possible weeks ago. She circled him carefully, running her palm along the massive flank, measuring girth, checking pulse. His heart rate was steady, strong, clean, powerful. No irregularities. She reached for her kit, drew blood, clipped a bit of mane, took a scraping from the shoulder. Through it all, Stormborn didn't move, not even a twitch. Clara leaned back, shaking her head. He doesn't even flinch. Wild horses kick when I draw blood. Eli said softly, he trusts people who don't mean harm. Her gaze flicked toward him, equal parts admiration and concern. You do realize, Turner, if he ever got spooked, nothing could stop him. Eli's answer was quiet but certain. That's what they said about soldiers, too. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. A week later, Clara returned, holding a thick envelope against her chest. Her expression was unreadable as she set it on Eli's kitchen table. I got the lab results, she said. You might want to sit down. Eli folded his arms, waiting. She opened the folder, scanning the first page with her thumb. Genetic tests came back. Pure Shire lineage. No hybrid markers, no signs of tampering or external DNA. He blinked. So he's just a horse. Her mouth tightened. Not just. There's an anomaly in his genome, an unclassified mutation that accelerates muscular and skeletal growth. No evidence of engineering, no chemical markers. It's natural, spontaneous. Eli frowned. So he's what a mistake. Clara hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. He shouldn't exist. They stood there, neither speaking, the quiet stretching between them. Outside, light poured through the stable door. Stormborn was out in the paddock mane, lifting in the wind, every line of his body carved with impossible perfection. Eli finally said, almost to himself, maybe that's what makes him real. Clara looked at him, the tension in her shoulders softening. I'll file this as an anomaly, but Turner, you know what happens when people hear about something like this? Then we keep it between us, he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. He's magnificent, Eli. But beauty like that draws both wonder and danger, he finished for her. Clara smiled faintly. Exactly. He glanced out the window at the glint of silver moving through sunlight. Been that way for every living thing worth saving. Evening fell golden and slow that day. The fields were damp with thawing frost, the air thick with the scent of pine sap. Eli opened the stable door, and Stormborn stepped into the open. No halter, no lead, just the quiet understanding between them. The horse moved across the meadow with an elegance that seemed borrowed from wind itself. Sunlight caught his coat, turning the silver black to liquid metal. His mane streamed like fire in reverse. Every motion was both strength and grace, like nature showing off what it could do when it forgot its limits. Eli leaned on the fence post, watching, notebook in hand. The words came without effort, now simple, sure. He ain't an accident. He's what happens when mercy meets the wild. He said it aloud, the sound nearly lost to the wind. You ain't some accident, Stormborn. You're what happens when mercy meets the wild. The horse turned, catching his voice, and began to walk toward him. Each step left a print dark and deep in the soft ground. When he reached the fence, He lowered his massive head and pressed it gently against Eli's chest. The man laughed a true laugh, this time rich and unguarded. He rested a hand against that warm neck and whispered, "All right then, partner. Let's keep proving him wrong." Stormborn snorted softly, the sound like a vow carried on the wind. The last light of day broke through the clouds, spilling over the valley in waves of gold. The ranch, once a place of grief and ghosts, now felt alive again. Not because it was tamed, but because something wild had chosen to stay. Eli closed his journal and set it on the fence. Behind him, the world glowed with the promise of spring. Ahead in the silver dusk stood the impossible breathing, shining reel. And for the first time in his life, Eli Turner stopped asking for explanations. He didn't need them anymore. Some miracles didn't ask permission to exist. They just did. May came bright and clean, a sky so blue it seemed scrubbed raw. The last of the snow clung stubbornly to the high ridges, while the lower fields of broken mesa shimmered with spring melt. Rivers ran high and fast, silver ribbons cutting through the dark earth. It should have been peace, a long-awaited thaw after the long winter. But peace never lasted long in Montana. The trouble began north of town. A freak snowstorm, late and mean, had swept down over the Bitterroot Range without warning, burying the northern pastures in white. The Red Hollow Cooperative's herd, more than 20 head, had been caught grazing in the canyons near Lost Spur. By the time word reached town, the passes were blocked, and the wind had already begun to howl again. In the square outside the general store, the townsfolk argued beneath the hard sunlight. "It's suicide going up there," one man shouted. "No man can reach 'em till spring clears," another barked. Sheriff Cole Merrick stood beside Hank Dawson, jaw tight. Even he had no plan, no machine, no truck that could cut through that kind of storm. Then the clinic phone rang. Clara Hensley's voice trembled through the receiver. "They'll die if no one gets to them by nightfall." Eli was quiet for a long moment. He didn't need to look far for his answer. Out in the yard, Stormborn stood with his mane whipping in the wind, breath rolling from his nostrils like smoke from a forge. He seemed to listen to the call itself, to feel the desperation in it. Eli met his gaze. "Guess we're going back into the storm, partner." He pulled his old riding gear from the hook, checked the cinch straps, and slung coils of rope across the saddle. He wrapped a strip of worn leather around Stormborn's neck, not as a rein, but as a promise. Overhead, the sky darkened, turning the color of tarnished steel. The wind rose, carrying the scent of snow. The second storm had come. By the time they reached the edge of town, the air was already thick with flurries. Eli pulled his scarf higher over his mouth and settled deep in the saddle. Stormborn shifted beneath him, steady as bedrock. Every step was deliberate, powerful. From the porch of the saloon, people watched in silence. The same men who had whispered about the devil horse now stood hat in hand, eyes wide with something closer to reverence than fear. A small boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Is he crazy?" The old man didn't look away. "No, son. He's got something to save." They rode out into the white. The road north was half gone under drifts. The storm came down fast, erasing the world beyond 10 feet. Snow stung Eli's face like shrapnel. He leaned low over Stormborn's neck, gripping the thick mane for balance. The horse pushed forward through the blizzard, unflinching as if guided by something unseen. Wind screamed through the canyons like the ghosts of old soldiers. The world was sound and motion, nothing else. At one crossing, the rope cart they'd rigged behind them jolted sideways, a plank snapping loose on the wooden bridge. Eli's shouted voice lost to the gale. "Easy, boy, we're not losing that rope." Stormborn braced his front legs, muscles flexing like Cable's neck, straining as he hauled the half-broken cart back onto the planks. The bridge creaked, but held. Eli patted his shoulder once. "Attaboy. Keep going." They pressed on for hours, following what little of the trail remained visible. By dusk, the sky had turned the color of smoke. When the first echoing cries of trapped animals reached them, faint, fractured, desperate, Eli knew they were close. He slid from the saddle boots, sinking to the ankle in wet snow. The canyon opened ahead, walls rising sheer and white, the wind funneling through like a living thing. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hang on," he shouted. "We're coming." The only answer was a broken whinny from deep within the gorge. Eli turned to Stormborn. "Show me the way, then. You lead." The stallion lowered his head and stepped forward, muscles bunching as he pushed through the drifts. His breath came in clouds, his eyes fixed on the sound ahead. Together, they descended into the storm's heart. The sight that met them stole Eli's breath. Half buried in the canyon floor were shapes, horses, 20 or more, trapped under snow and ice. Some still struggling weakly, others too still to tell. The wind shrieked through the narrow gap, tearing at man and beast alike. Eli looped a rope around Stormborn's chest, tightening the knot with shaking hands. Then he trudged toward the nearest trapped mare, snow up to his thighs. "Pull, Storm, pull." The horse heaved, the full force of his body surging forward. His hooves clawed for purchase on the frozen ground, throwing up shards of ice. For a moment, nothing moved then. With a cracking sound, the drift gave way. The mare slid free, collapsing into the slush, breathing hard but alive. Eli staggered to her, cutting the rope loose. "Good girl. You're okay now." Then he turned back toward Stormborn, his voice raw. "Next one." The cycle repeated. Rope, pull, release. The storm grew worse. Snow hammered them in waves, blinding, freezing. Eli's beard crusted with ice. His fingers bled through his gloves. Still he worked. Still Stormborn pulled. When Eli's legs gave out for a moment, Stormborn nudged him up with his head, then went right back to work. Far above the faint glare of headlights cut through the storm, two figures appeared on the ridge, Sheriff Merrick and Hank Dawson. They froze at what they saw below, a man and a horse, both ghost-like in the blizzard, dragging life out of death. Merrick whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "Sweet Lord? That ain't no horse. That's a storm given flesh." For more than an hour, they watched in silence as the pair fought against the impossible, until one by one, every horse stood free. The herd, dazed and trembling, clustered together behind Stormborn like children behind a giant. When the last rope was cut, Eli sank to his knees. The wind still screamed, but he no longer heard it. Stormborn swayed where he stood, sides, heaving foam flecking his mouth. He tried to step forward, then stumbled, collapsing into the snow with a thud that sent a plume of powder skyward. Storm Eli's voice cracked as he scrambled to his side. He dropped the rope, pulled the horse's head into his lap. Steam rose from the body, the heat of life fading too fast. "You ain't dying on me," he whispered hoarsely. "Not after all we've come through?" "You hear me?" The horse didn't move. His chest rose, fell slow, uneven, but there. Eli pressed his forehead to the wet mane. "Stay with me, boy. You did it. You damn did it." He didn't know how long he sat there, wind cutting through every layer of his clothes. But he didn't move until he felt the pulse steady under his hands. The storm passed sometime before dawn. By the time the sun rose, Lost Spur Canyon was silent, a world remade in gold and white. Eli sat slumped beside Stormborn, wrapped in a frost-stiffened blanket. His fingers were numb, his body aching, but the steady rhythm of the horse's breathing kept him anchored. When the first light broke over the ridge, it struck the stallion's coat and turned it molten. Every strand of hair glowed like liquid steel. Steam curled off his body where the sun touched the frost. It was like watching the storm's fury burn away to reveal its heart. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind him. Hank and Merrick approached both men hollow-eyed, but smiling. Merrick held a tin cup of coffee that steamed in the cold. "Figured you could use this," he said quietly. "We thought we'd lost you both." Eli accepted it with shaking hands. His voice came out rough. "Not today." Hank glanced past him to the herd milling restlessly a few yards away. One young mare broke from the group and walked up to Stormborn. She lowered her head and pressed it gently to his neck, a gesture of submission, respect. Hank exhaled, voice reverent. "He ain't just a horse anymore, Cole. He's something else." Eli didn't speak. He only reached forward, resting his palm against Stormborn's forehead. Beneath it, the pulse beat strong and sure again, not frantic, not fading, but steady, like the heartbeat of the land itself. For a while, no one said anything. The wind softened, carrying the faint scent of pine and melted snow. Somewhere high above, a hawk cried, the sound sharp, clean alive. Stormborn shifted, then began to rise. Slowly, shakily, but with determination. His massive body trembled, then straightened. Sunlight flared off his coat as he lifted his head to the sky. Then from deep within his chest came a sound no one there would ever forget. A long, rolling cry, not defiance, not rage, but something older and purer, a call to the morning. The herd answered in kind, their voices echoing through the canyon, turning the frozen silence into song. Eli stood snow melting beneath his boots and watched the light dance over the valley. He smiled through cracked lips. "Told you he ain't dying," he said softly. And for the first time, even Sheriff Merrick didn't doubt it. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the mist. In its glow, man and horse stood side by side, survivors of two storms, both changed by what they had saved. The storm had tested them, but in its wake something greater had taken root, a legend born of mercy muscle and the wild beating heart of Montana itself. The blizzard had passed, but another kind of storm was brewing. A week after Lost Spur Canyon, Hank's old camcorder footage hit the internet, shaky, grainy, raw, but powerful enough to stop the nation cold. In the video, Stormborn towered against the wind, dragging ropes heavy with snow and life, while Eli knelt beside him, half-buried, shouting through the storm. The screen shook white and wild, then steadied just long enough to capture one impossible moment, the horse pulling 20 lives out of death. Someone uploaded it with the title, "The Giant Horse of Montana." By morning, it had 5,000 views. By the next night, 5 million. Headlines followed veteran and his miracle horse, saved 20. In Bitterroot blizzard. "Is this the strongest horse alive?" Reporters flooded Red Hollow. Satellite trucks parked along Main Street. Cameramen stood knee-deep in thawing snow, broadcasting to the world about a creature of myth and muscle, about a man healed by mercy. Eli watched from behind the closed gate of Broken Mesa Ranch, hat pulled low, every knock on his door going unanswered. Stormborn stood quietly behind the fence, the morning sun glinting off his silver coat. To strangers, he looked like a living statue, a marvel too perfect to trust. People stared, whispered, filmed. But miracles, Eli knew, had a way of drawing hunters. 3 days later, a line of black trucks rolled into town. The insignia on their doors read, FWA, Federal Wildlife Authority. They didn't come for stories. They came with orders. By the time Sheriff Cole called him, Eli already knew. "They're coming." Eli Hank's voice rasped over the radio. Whole damn convoy. Eli set the radio down, slow and deliberate. He turned toward the corral where Stormborn stood watching him as if he understood. The wind caught the horse's mane, turning it into white flame. Eli tightened the cinch strap on the saddle. Then, I guess it's time to see what kind of storm we really are. Morning broke pale and cold when the government trucks arrived at Broken Mesa. 3 pickups, 1 animal transport van, and a black SUV carrying men in field coats and mirrored sunglasses. Sheriff Cole Merrick led the convoy, his face drawn, his badge catching the thin light. Eli and Stormborn were waiting in the yard. The stallion stood motionless, head-high silver coat gleaming against the dark wood of the barn. The federal team hesitated when they saw him, even from a distance. The horse radiated a calm that felt less like obedience and more like awareness. One of the officials stepped forward, a folder in hand. "Mr. Turner," he said formally, "we're here to relocate the specimen for federal observation." Eli's jaw tightened. He's not a specimen. He's my partner. The agent held up the paper. "Federal orders, sir. Possible biohazard classification." Before Eli could answer, a voice rang from behind the fence. "You touch that horse, you go through all of us." Clara Hensley marched up the drive, her coat unbuttoned, eyes fierce. Behind her came Hank, 2 ranchers and half a dozen townsfolk from Red Hollow. Others followed, quiet faces hardened by loyalty. Hank planted himself in front of the lead truck. "You saw what he did. That horse saved lives when no man could." One of the agents moved to speak, but the crowd surged closer, blocking the road. Homemade signs appeared in trembling hands. "Protect Stormborn. Mercy isn't illegal." Sheriff Cole stepped between them, torn between his badge and his conscience. "Orders are orders," he said quietly. "But hell, this doesn't feel right." The agent turned to him. "Sheriff, your cooperation is required." Cole didn't move. His hand rested on his belt, not on his gun, but on the chain of his badge. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "cooperation's a matter of who you think you're serving." The air was tense, the wind rising. Even the horses in the distant paddocks had gone silent. Then a younger member of the federal team, barely 30, spoke softly. "Sir, the animal's calm. Not aggressive. He's not a threat." Clara stepped forward, holding out a folder. "You want data? Here's data." She flipped it open to a page of lab results. Clean. No disease, no mutation. Perfect vitals. And this, she turned another page, is a VA psychological report. Eli Turner's PTSD symptoms reduced by 80% since bonding with Stormborn. He hasn't needed medication in months. The agent hesitated, glancing at his superiors. The crowd pressed closer, their breath visible in the cold. Eli said nothing. He just stood with one hand on Stormborn's neck, calm as the horse beside him. Finally, Sheriff Cole blew out a breath. "We'll take this to court," he said, voice firm. "No one's shooting or seizing anything today." The agents looked at one another, then reluctantly stepped back. 2 weeks later, the courthouse in Flathead County overflowed. The case was listed on the docket as State of Montana versus Eli Turner, custody of animals Stormborn. Presiding Judge Marion Crow, 62, sharp-eyed with the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. The benches were packed, locals filled the aisles, reporters jammed the back. Veterans in uniform sat shoulder to shoulder with school children clutching handmade posters. No one had seen a hearing like it in years. Stormborn wasn't present. He wouldn't have fit in the courthouse, even if he'd been allowed. But his image filled the projection screen, a frozen still of him. In the storm, snow curling around his main muscles, straining against the ropes. The air in the room shifted when it appeared like the weight of silence itself had entered. Dr. Clara Hensley was first to testify. "He's pure Shire," she said, voice steady. "No hybrid markers, no genetic tampering. Physically extraordinary, yes, but biologically sound. There's no reason for removal." Next came Hank. His hat stayed in his hands the whole time. "I've seen killers in my life," he said quietly. "Sheriff's seen 'em too. That horse ain't one. He's the reason 20 animals and 1 man are alive today." They played the video after that. The room went still. No sound except for the faint rustle of sleeves. On-screen Stormborn hauled the last horse-free snow, exploding around him like white fire while Eli shouted words lost to the wind. When the footage ended, no one spoke. Even Judge Crow looked down for a moment, eyes glinting with something unsaid. A psychologist from the Veterans Administration took the stand next. "Mr. Turner's mental recovery," she said, "is directly linked to the animal's companionship. Removing the horse would be clinically detrimental." The government attorney stood. His tone was careful, rehearsed. "The law forbids private ownership of non-domestic animals of unverified classification. Extraordinary or not, the statute is clear." Judge Crow leaned forward, tapping her pen against the desk. "Tell me, counsel," she said. "Do you see anything non-domestic about Mercy?" A ripple of laughter passed through the room. The attorney had no reply. For the next 2 hours, the debate went on science, ethics, legality, until finally the gavel struck. The judge disappeared into chambers. The crowd waited in uneasy quiet, the weight of expectation pressing on every breath. When the doors opened again, she carried the verdict in her hand. The law, Judge Crow said, her voice steady but resonant, was made to protect life, not to punish Mercy. She paused, eyes sweeping the room. "This horse stays." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then applause broke like thunder. People rose to their feet. Some wept openly. Hank clapped until his hands went red. Clara wiped her eyes. Sheriff Cole just smiled and shook his head. Eli stood frozen relief, crashing through him in waves he couldn't put into words. After the hearing, the clerk handed him an official document stamped with the state seal, "Therapeutic Companion Animal Stormborn." Registered under federal exemption, Tambruni 187A. Eli stared at it for a long time before taking it in his hands. His fingers trembled not from fear, but from something that felt like gratitude, too heavy to name. Judge Crow stepped down from the bench and approached him. "Mr. Turner," she said softly, "I've presided over 1,000 cases. None reminded me this much that humanity's worth defending." Eli nodded, his throat tight. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "he's not mine. He just let me borrow a little of his courage." Outside the courthouse steps were crowded. Sheriff Cole was waiting, hat in hand. He reached out and shook Eli's hand firmly. "Guess the storm brought you something worth keeping." Eli's smile was faint but certain. "No, Sheriff. It brought me back myself." The press swarmed them, then cameras, flashing microphones thrust forward. One reporter shouted, "Mr. Turner, do you believe your horse is a miracle?" Eli looked past the crowd toward the sky, that endless Montana blue stretching above the courthouse dome. Then he said simply, "He's not a miracle. He's proof Mercy still works." The words carried across the square, echoing between stone walls and satellite dishes. Cameras clicked. One photo captured the moment perfectly. Eli holding the permit's sunlight glinting off the gold seal, the shadow of a horse cast long behind him. By evening, that image was everywhere. Front pages, banners, screens. A veteran, a horse, a country reminded what kindness looked like. And back at Broken Mesa, far from the noise and headlines, the wind moved quietly across the open fields. Stormborn stood by the fence, watching the horizon fade into dusk. Eli leaned against the post beside him, the folded permit tucked into his jacket. "World's got eyes on you now," he murmured. "Guess we better live up to the name." The horse turned, pressed his forehead lightly against Eli's shoulder. The sound he made was soft, a low, familiar rumble, like distant thunder on a calm day. Eli smiled into the wind. "Yeah," he said. "Storm's over. Let's keep it that way." The sun dropped behind the ridge, painting the valley in gold and silver, the colors of things that had survived. And for the first time, Mercy itself had a name. A full year had passed since the verdict that changed everything. Spring had returned to Broken Mesa, soft green alive. The high ridges still carried a trace of white, but the valley below pulsed with new growth. Snowmelt streamed down in silver ribbons, and the meadows shimmered under the morning sun. Eli Turner's ranch stood calm and rebuilt. The barn was twice its old size, now weathered wood, shining honey gold in the light. A small sign hung on the gate, "Private Ranch, Home of Stormborn." Please respect the peace. People did. Red Hollow had learned to let the story breathe. The cameras were long gone, the reporters moved on to newer miracles, and only the wind still remembered the day a horse pulled life out of a storm. Each morning, Eli made coffee on the porch, while Stormborn stood a few yards away, sniffing the scent of smoke and beans, like he'd learned to love it too. The journal still sat on the table beside the mug, and the same one that once held measurements, weights, and heart rates. Now its pages read differently: weather calm, heart calm. The people of Red Hollow no longer whispered his name like a legend. They just waved when he came to town. Children sometimes mailed letters, scribbled in colored pencils, "Tell Stormborn hi." Eli would chuckle softly, reading them aloud by the stove. "Guess you're a celebrity partner," he'd say. Stormborn would snort in reply, and Eli would laugh the kind of laughter that doesn't echo, only warms. No more storms, no more noise. Just sunlight, grass, and the quiet rhythm of breath. One bright April morning, a dust-colored Jeep appeared on the dirt road, humming softly as it climbed toward the ranch. It stopped at the gate, where the sign swung gently in the wind. A young woman stepped out, sharp eyes, wind-tangled hair, and a notebook clutched under her arm. Lydia Grant, reporter for the Frontier Journal. She'd written ahead, polite, insistent, asking for an interview a year after the storm. Eli had almost said no. But something about the letter, earnest handwritten, made him think maybe she wasn't here for headlines. He met her on the porch, 2 steaming mugs already waiting. Lydia smiled as she took hers. "What made you bring him home that night?" she asked. Eli stared out toward the field where Stormborn grazed in the morning light. "Didn't seem right," he said quietly. "Let enough fighter die alone." She wrote it down, eyes soft. "Do you ever regret it?" Eli chuckled under his breath. "Every day I think I should have done it sooner." Lydia looked out to the pasture where the great silver horse lifted his head mane, rippling like a river of light. "He doesn't seem wild at all," she said. Eli shook his head. "He's not tamed either. We just met in the middle." When Lydia rose to leave, Stormborn approached the fence, watching her curiously. She laughed, holding out a hand. The stallion lowered his massive head and sniffed her sleeve before giving a soft huff that blew her hair back. "He really is beautiful," she whispered. Eli smiled. "See, boy, still changing lives, even when you're quiet." She drove away down the dirt road, the Jeep kicking up a trail of golden dust that hung in the air long after she was gone. 2 weeks later, the Frontier Journal released her piece. The Cowboy Who Rode the Storm. It wasn't written like a miracle story. It read like a hymn about compassion, endurance, and the strange ways healing finds us when we least deserve it. He didn't conquer the storm, Lydia wrote. He became part of it and found peace inside it. The article spread far beyond Montana. Veterans groups shared it. Teachers printed it. Churches read it aloud on Sunday mornings. Letters poured into the journal's office from a Marine in Texas. That story made me pick up the reins again. From a field nurse in Arizona, if that horse could survive the cold, maybe I can survive the memories. Dr. Clara Hensley read it in her clinic and cried quietly over her desk. Hank printed it out and pinned it above the forge in his smithy. Sheriff Cole left a copy folded on his desk, murmuring to no one. Guess we all needed that storm. Eli didn't read it right away. He didn't have to. People told him every word. But one evening, curiosity got the better of him. He opened the paper, read in silence, and stopped at the final line. Some storms destroy. Others deliver you home. He closed the paper slowly, eyes bright with a sting of truth. Then he stepped outside where Stormborn waited in the glow of the setting sun. Come on, partner, he said softly. Let's see what the world looks like after all that noise. Dawn came clean and gold across Broken Mesa. The mist clung low to the grass, and the air smelled of earth and renewal. Water trickled down from the hills, gathering into narrow creeks that gleamed like glass. Stormborn stood alone in the pasture, his coat catching the first light silver, turning to fire, then back again. From the horizon came the faint thunder of hooves. Eli, standing on the porch with his coffee, shaded his eyes. A herd appeared through the fog, wild horses lean and dark, their manes heavy with dew. They moved like wind, given form, their silhouettes shimmering in the morning haze. Slowly they approached the fence, stopping just short of the boundary line. The air between them and Stormborn shimmered quiet, expectant. Stormborn lifted his head, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. The wind shifted. For a heartbeat, the world held still. One of the wild mares whinnied high, clear and bright. A greeting, a call. Eli smiled faintly. You hear that, boy? Sounds like they're calling family. The giant stallion stood motionless for a long moment, the breath from his nostrils curling white in the dawn air. Then he took a single step forward. The herd waited, muscles taut, ready to run if he crossed the line. Eli's chest tightened. Maybe this was it. Maybe the wild had finally come to take back what belonged to it. But Stormborn turned. Slowly, deliberately, he walked back toward the porch, toward the man who had pulled him from death. He stopped beside Eli, lowering his head until his mane brushed the man's shoulder. Eli laid a hand against the warm, living silver. His voice was barely a whisper. Storm never meant to take you, just to bring you here. The horse exhaled a deep, rumbling sound that rolled like distant thunder. Then he lifted his head high and called out a long, low cry that carried across the whole valley. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't grief. It was music, the sound of peace itself, finding its voice. The herd answered their echoes, blending into the wind, until it was impossible to tell which came from them and which from the earth. Eli stood still, eyes on the horizon, one hand resting on the horse that had turned a storm into something sacred. Around them, the prairie swayed in the soft morning light, endless and alive. The world for once didn't need saving. It only needed to be heard. And as the sun climbed higher, the legend of the storm settled back into silence. Not gone, just resting in the hearts of those who still believed that mercy could change the world.